Hello, Cardinals, and welcome to our second installment of Cormac McCarthy's The Road. He squatted and scooped up a handful of stones and smelled them and let them fall clattering. Polished, round, and smooth as marbles or lozenges of stone, veined and striped, black disklets and bits of polished quartz, all bright from the mist off the river. The boy walked out and squatted and lapped up the dark water. The waterfall fell into a pool almost at its center. A gray curd circled. They stood side by side, calling to each other over the din. Is it cold? Yes, freezing. Do you want to go in? I don't know. Sure you do. Is it okay? Come on. He unzipped his parka and let it fall to the gravel, and the boy stood up and they undressed and walked out into the water, ghostly pale and shivering. The boy so thin it stopped his heart. He dove headlong and came up gasping and turned and stood, beating his arms. Is it over my head? The boy called. No, come on. He turned and swam out to the falls and let the water beat upon him. The boy was standing in the pool to his waist, holding his shoulders and hopping up and down. The man went back and got him. He held him and floated him about, the boy gasping and chopping at the water. You're doing good, the man said. You're doing good. They dressed shivering and then climbed the trail to the upper river. They walked out along the rocks to where the river seemed to end in space, and he held the boy while he ventured out to the last ledge of rock. The river went sucking over the rim and fell straight down into the pool below. The entire river. He clung to the man's arm. It's really far, he said. It's pretty far. Would you die if you fell? You'd get hurt. It's a long way. It's really scary. They walked out through the woods. The light was failing. They followed the flats along the upper river among huge dead trees, a rich southern wood that once held many apple and Pipsisua? Dude, I don't know what that word is. Ginseng. The raw dead limbs of the rhododendron twisted and knotted and black. He stopped. Something in the mulch and ash. He stooped and cleared it away. A small colony of them, shrunken, dried, and wrinkled. He picked one and held it and sniffed it. He bit a piece from the edge and chewed. What is it, Papa? Morels. It's morels. What's morels? They're a kind of mushroom. Can you eat them? Yeah, take a bite. Are they good? Take a bite. The boy smelled the mushroom and bit into it and stood chewing. He looked at his father. These are pretty good, he said. They pulled the morels from the ground, small alien-looking things that he piled in the hood of the boy's parka. They hiked back out to the road and down to where they'd left the cart, and they made camp by the river pool at the falls and washed the earth and ash from the morels and put them to soak in a pan of water. By the time he had the fire going, it was dark, and he sliced a handful of the mushrooms on a log for their dinner and scooped them into a frying pan along with the fat pork from the can of beans and set them in the coals to simmer. The boy watched him. This is a good place, Papa, he said. They ate the little mushrooms together with the beans and drank tea and had tinned pears for their dessert. He banked the fire against the seam of a rock where he'd built it, and he strung a tarp behind them to reflect the heat, and they sat warm in their refuge while he told the boy stories. Old stories of courage and justice as he remembered them, until the boy was asleep in his blankets, and then he stoked the fire and lay down warm and full, and listened to the low thunder of the falls beyond them in the dark and threadbare wood. He walked out in the morning and took the river path downstream. The boy was right that it was a good place, and he wanted to check for any sign of other visitors. He found nothing. He stood watching the river where it swung loping into a pool and curled and eddied. He dropped a white stone into the water, but it vanished as suddenly as if it had been eaten. He stood at such a river once and watched the flash of trout deep in a pool, invisible to see in the tea-colored water except as they turned on their sides to feed, reflecting back the sun deep in the darkness like a flash of knives in a cave. We can't stay, he said. It's getting colder every day, and the waterfall's an attraction. It was for us, and it will be for others. We don't know who they will be, and we can't hear them coming. It's not safe. We could stay one more day. It's not safe. Well, maybe we could find some other place on the river. We have to keep moving. We have to keep heading south. Doesn't the river go south? No, it doesn't. Can I see it on the map? Yes, let me get it. The tattered oil company road map had once been taped together, but now it was just sorted into leaves and numbered with crayon in the corners for their assembly. He sorted through the limp pages and spread out those that answered to their location. We cross a bridge here. It looks to be about 8 miles or so. This is the river going east. We follow the road here along the eastern slope of the mountains. These are our roads, the black lines on the map, the state roads. Why are they state roads? Because they used to belong to states, what used to be called states. But there aren't any more states? No. What happened to them? I don't know exactly. That's a good question. But the roads are still there? Yes, for a while. How long a while? I don't know, maybe quite a while. There's nothing to uproot them, so they should be okay for a while. But there won't be any cars or trucks on them. No. Okay. Are you ready? The boy nodded. He wiped his nose on his sleeve and shouldered up the small pack, and the man folded away the map sections in rows, and the boy followed him out through the gray palings of the trees to the road. When the bridge came in sight below them, there was a tractor trailer jackknifed sideways across it and wedged into the buckled iron railings. It was raining again, and they stood there with the rain pattering softly on the tarp, peering out from under the blue gloom beneath the plastic. Can we get around it? The boy said. I don't think so. We could probably get under it. We may have to unload the cart. The bridge spanned the river above of rapids. They could hear a noise of it as they came around the curve to the road. A wind was coming down the gorge, and they pulled the corners of the tarp about them and pushed the cart out onto the bridge. They could see the river through the ironwork. Below the rapids was a railroad bridge laid on limestone piers. The stones of the piers were stained well above the river from high water, and the bend of the river was choked with great windrows of black limbs and brush and the trunks of trees. The truck had been there for years, the tires flat and crumbling under the rims. The front of the tractor was jammed against the railing of the bridge, and the trailer had sheared forward off the top plate and jammed up against the back of the cab. The rear of the trailer had swung out and buckled the rail on the other side of the bridge, and it hung several feet out over the river gorge. He pushed the cart up under the trailer, but the handle wouldn't clear. They'd have to slide it under sideways. He left it sitting in the rain with the tarp over it, and they duck walked under the trailer, and he left the boy crouched in the dry while he climbed up on the gas tank step and wiped the water from the glass and peered inside the cab. He stepped back down and reached up and opened the door and then climbed in and pulled the door shut behind him. He sat looking around, an old doghouse sleeper behind the seats, papers on the floor. The glove box was open, but it was empty. He climbed back between the seats. There was a raw damp mattress on the bunk and a small refrigerator with the door standing open, fold down table, old magazines on the floor. He went through the plywood lockers overhead, but they were empty. There were drawers under the bunk, and he pulled them out and looked through the trash. He climbed forward into the cabin again and sat in the driver's seat and looked out down the river through the slow trickle of water on the glass, the thin drum of rain on the metal roof, and the slow darkness falling over everything. They slept that night in the truck, and in the morning the rain had stopped, and they unloaded the cart and passed everything under the truck to the other side and reloaded it. Down, sorry, down the bridge 100 feet or so were the blackened remains of tires that had been burned there. He stood looking at the trailer. What do you think is in there? He said. I don't know. We're not the first ones here, so probably nothing. There's no way to get in. He put his ear to the side of the trailer and whacked the sheet metal with the flat of his hand. It sounds empty, he said. You can probably get in from the roof. Somebody would have to cut a hole in it by now. What would they cut it with? They'd find something. He took off his parka and laid it across the top of the cart and climbed onto the fender of the tractor and onto the hood and clambered up over the windscreen to the roof of the cab. He stood and turned and looked down at the river, wet metal underfoot. He looked down at the boy. The boy looked worried. He turned and reached and got a grip on the front of the trailer and slowly pulled himself up. It was all he could do, and there was a lot less of him to pull. He got one leg up over the edge and hung there resting. Then he pulled himself up and rolled over and sat up. There was a skylight about a third of the way down the roof, and he made his way into it in a walking crouch. The cover was gone, and the inside of the trailer smelled of wet plywood and the sour smell he'd come to know. He had a magazine in his hip pocket, and he took it out and tore some pages from it, wadded them, and got out his lighter and lit the papers and dropped them into the darkness. A faint whooshing. He wafted away the smoke and looked down in the trailer. The small fire burning in the floor seemed a long way down. He shielded the glare of it with his hand, and when he did, he could almost see the rear of the box. Human bodies, sprawled in every attitude, dried and shrunken in their rotten clothes. The small wad of burning paper drew down to a wisp of flame and then died out, leaving a faint pattern for just a moment in the incandescence, like the shape of a flower, a molten rose. And then it was all dark again. They camped that night in the woods on a ridge overlooking the broad Piedmont plain where it stretched away to the south. He built a cook fire against a rock, and they ate the last of the morels and a can of spinach. In the night, a storm broke in the mountains above them and came cannonading down country, cracking and booming, and the stark gray world appeared again and again out of the night in the shrouded flare of lightning. The boy clung to him. It all passed on, a brief rattle of hail and then the slow, cold rain. When he woke again, it was still dark, but the rain had stopped. A smoky light out there in the valley. He rose and walked out along the ridge. A haze of fire that stretched for miles. He squatted and watched it. He could smell the smoke. He wet his fingers and held it to the wind. When he rose and turned to go back, the tarp was lit from within where the boy had wakened. Seated there in the darkness, the frail blue shape of it looked like a pitch of some last venture at the edge of the world. Something all but unaccountable. And so it was. All the day following, they traveled through the drifting haze of wood smoke. In the draws, the smoke coming off the ground like mist, and the thin black trees burning on the slopes like stands of heathen candles. Late in the day, they came to a place where the fire had crossed the road, and the macadam was still warm, and further on it began to soften underfoot. The hot black mastics sucking at their shoes and stretching in thin bands as they stepped. They stopped. "We'll have to wait here," he said. They backtracked and camped in the actual road, and when they went on in the morning, the macadam had cooled. By and by, they came to a set of tracks cooked into the tar. They just suddenly appeared. He squatted and studied them. Someone had come out of the woods in the night and continued down the melted roadway. "Who is it?" said the boy. "I don't know. Who is anybody?" They came upon him shuffling along the road before them, dragging one leg slightly and stopping from time to time to stand stooped and uncertain before setting out again. "What should we do, Papa?" "We're all right. Let's just follow and watch." "Take a look," said the boy. "Yes, take a look." They followed him a good ways, but at his pace they were losing the day, and finally he just sat in the road and did not get up again. The boy hung on to his father's coat. No one spoke. He was as burnt looking as the country, his clothing scorched and black. One of his eyes was burnt shut, and his hair was but a nitty wig of ash upon the blackened skull. As they passed, he looked down as if he'd done something wrong. His shoes were bound up with wire and coated with road tar, and he sat there in silence, bent over in his rags. The boy kept looking back. "Papa," he whispered, "what's wrong with that man?" "He's been struck by lightning." "Can't we help him, Papa?" "No, we can't help him." The boy kept pulling at his coat. "Papa," he said. "Stop it." "Can't we help him, Papa?" "No, we can't help him. There's nothing to be done for him." They went on. The boy was crying. He kept looking back. When they got to the bottom of the hill, the man stopped and looked at him and looked back up the road. The birdman had fallen over, and at a distance you couldn't even tell what it was. "I'm sorry," he said, "but we have nothing to give him. We have no way to help him. I'm sorry for what happened to him, but we can't fix it. You know that, don't you?" The boy stood looking down. He nodded his head. And then they went on, and he didn't look back again. At evening, a dull sulphur light from the fires, the standing water in the roadside ditches black with the runoff. The mountains shut away. They crossed a river by a concrete bridge where skeins of ash and slurry moved slowly in the current. Charred bits of wood. In the end, they stopped and turned back and camped under a bridge. He'd carried his billfold about till it wore a corner-shaped hole in his trousers. And then one day he sat by the roadside and took it out and went through the contents. Some money, credit cards, his driver's license, a picture of his wife. He spread everything out on the blacktop. like gaming cards. He pitched the sweat-blackened piece of leather into the woods and sat holding the photograph. And then he laid it down in the road also. And then he stood and they went on. In the morning, he lay looking up at the clay nest that swallows had built in the corners under the bridge. They looked at the boy, but the boy had turned. I'm sorry, he looked at the boy, but the boy had turned away and lay staring out at the river. There's nothing we could have done. He didn't answer. He's going to die. We can't share what we have, or we'll die too. I know. So when are you going to talk to me again? I'm talking now. Are you sure? Yes. Okay. Okay. They stood on the far shore of a river and called to him, tattered gods slouching in their rags across the waste, trekking the dried floor of a mineral sea where it lay cracked and broken like a fallen plate, paths of feral fire on the coagulate sands. The figures faded in the distance. He woke and lay in the dark.